this series of 3 town hall meetings starting today here at the Alexandra School. Then we go to, I think it's Princess Margaret, and then the St. Michael's School. First of all, I want to welcome those commissioners who are here. We have the chair of this committee, Mrs. Roberta Clark. We also have the deputy chair, VNL Allen Jones. We have Paula Bayer, Mr. Rudder, which is not Pierce. It's real. Nobody knows it's not Pierce. Boo Rudder, Mr. Pierce Rudder, and Yolande Allen. We're hoping that we can have good discussion on this policy, which has had a lot of discussions already with a number of interest groups. And I think this is the final stage in the whole consultative process leading to the development of this population policy. We hope during these meetings that we would, any questions that are still outstanding, anyone who still have some queries as to what a policy is and why a policy at this time, why does Barbados need a policy, and those kind of questions, that we will have those questions answered. And before I continue, let me continue to welcome those members of the commission who may not be here but online, also any other persons who are involved in this process. Ms. Janelle Canterbury-Muncy, Mr. Wood, Dr. Lashley, Dr. Murphy, and the Director of Economic Affairs, Patrick McCaskey, and any other persons involved. Certainly, Ms. Winnell Savory from the Ministry of Economic Affairs. We want to thank all those who are here this evening in some way helping to facilitate these town hall meetings, and all those who are online. Also, thank you for joining us. As I said, we hope that you would contribute to these meetings. And I also want to welcome the representative for St. James North, Mr. Edmund Hinkson, who is very much involved, I know, in persons with disabilities and he has a number of other interests. And certainly, we're hoping that when we're looking at this policy, that persons with disabilities will also have a special mention. I know there are, but this is one group I know government is working in another area on trying to improve their lot as well. So a population policy is a very comprehensive document, and certainly the persons who have put this policy together, the consultant, those who prepared the population figures and so, all the persons who were involved have done a very good job to date, and I'm hoping that very soon that we will see this policy implemented. It's not the first attempt at a policy, but I think it's the first time we have reached this far. And certainly this will be what we would call an explicit policy, where we have a separate document with all of the policies and so relating to population in one place. But over the years, you would have had what some people call an implicit policy, where you have over a number of different places in different documents, a lot of different policies, programs, and so that are geared to either influence the components of population change, which are namely mortality, fertility, and migration. So at one point, the government would have had a policy relating to out-migration or emigration and in-migration. They would have also had a policy in relation to births, because even though you might have had a document saying X, Y, and Z, the fact that they give concessions for persons or families with children, that in itself is a policy or program designed to, I suppose, encourage persons to have births. So, as I said, it's the first attempt to have a real explicit policy where all of the documents and so are put together, all of the policies and so are put together in one single document. So we are going to, before we open to the to the public. We are going to have the chair of the Population Council, Commission, sorry, Mrs. Roberta Clark, to give some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford, and good afternoon to everyone online and the few of us who are here in this lovely hall at Alexandra School. I want to really recognize Mr. Hinkson, who's here with us today, who gave us a lot of support whilst we were doing aspects of this work over the last 3 years. Welcome, Mr. Hinkson, and we expect from you your usual frank conversation and direct questions. Thank you for coming. Okay, so just to say, let me go back. Mr. Ford has already introduced the members of the Commission, but I just wanted to note for the record that the Commission started its work in January 2019, and the Commission itself, these are names that you're seeing here, but the names, behind the names, there's quite a lot of expertise and experience. So the Population Commission is comprised of people who have expertise in physical planning and urban planning, environmental management, cultural development, public health, human rights, demography, social policy research, and public sector planning. When we were established in January 2019, we were given two tasks, this commission. The first one was to prepare what is known as a population situational analysis, and we call it PSA lovingly. And within that PSA, we try to do two things. One, analyze the causes and some of the consequences of the trends in population size and age structure based on a review of birth, death, and migration rates since 1960. And the second aspect of that report was the government asked us to make projections on the size of the population and indeed also the structure, the age structure of the population over the next 20 to 30 years if these trends in birth rates, death rates, and migration rates continued without any intervention. So that's the first aspect of our work, which we completed in, I want to say, in 2020. I think we took about a year to do that report, and drawing on census data, on data sources from across many ministries, of course, and literature on public policy work. The second function of the Commission, the second of a two-part function, based on what we would have come up with in the situational analysis, the second task was to develop a draft population policy which identified population goals and interventions to address any impediments which we may have found in that analysis to achieving the state's long-term economic, I would say medium-term and long-term economic, social and environmental objectives. So that's the purpose of the Commission. It is I want to really stress that, it's an independent, non-partisan commission comprised of people with expertise across a range of areas. So to say a little bit about the situational analysis, as I said before, we took about a year to do that. But these are the sort of the main population findings. We say main demographic findings, and that's just a complicated way to say findings about the size and the structure of the population. So we found these maybe 6 main findings. One, that Barbados has had very controlled population growth. In the post-independence period, we've had consistent declines in fertility rates, birth rates and fertility rates since 1960, but also decrease in death rates as a result of improvements in the health service delivery. And where you have decreasing death rates, you also have increasing longevity. So we see that very much so for Barbados as well. We've had a declining percentage of persons of working age, and in the world of demography, a working age person is defined as somebody between 16 and 64. Of course, we know in Barbados the retirement age is now 67, and in fact, most people don't go into the workforce in any full-time way below 18, because we do have secondary school here, but it's a kind of a rough indicator. And then we've seen a growth in the proportion of the people who are over 65, so let's call them the Asian or the older person population. And as a result of declining birth rates and declining death rates and longevity, what we also see is a higher dependency ratio due to the reduced numbers of persons, as I said, of working age in relation to persons who are older and persons who are under 15. Those populations where there's an assumption of growing dependency on persons of working age. And when we say dependency, it's not financial dependency, maybe care dependency, the levels of interdependency, I suppose, that we expect around or across the life cycle. So those were kind of the main findings, and here just to show you graphically, because of some of us. This is Caribbean countries, and as you see, Barbados' growth rate, population growth rate, population growth has been only 24% between 1960 and 2018. So the population of Barbados has grown very, very modestly and moderately since 1960. And you will see in contrast a country like Belize, where there's been over 300% increase in the population between 60 and 2018. Countries like Jamaica, well over 50% population. Trinidad and Tobago, over 50% population. Antigua and Barbuda, over 50% population. The only country that has a lower increase in population since 1960 than Barbados is Dominica. And as we know, Dominica has had successive, rather devastating hurricanes. So thinking now about total fertility rates or declining birth rates too. So fertility rate is the kind of, tells us what happens to women across their reproductive, at the completion of their reproductive years. And you see, for all these countries that we have here, Barbados, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, you will see the same trend of declining fertility rates. So the only country that is below Barbados here on this chart, you may not be able to see it online so clearly, but the only country below Barbados here is St. Lucia, but all of them are well below what is called the fertility replacement rate, well below the 2.1 average. So what does that mean by way of population structure and size? So this chart, this graph shows you structure by way of age and size. And what we're seeing, so you start in 2010, and that census in 2010 showed the population of Barbados to be 277,000. Is that right, commissioners? I think around there, 277,000. So that's in 2010, and actually there's a census which took place last year, and I think we're in the state of cleaning up the data, so we should know what the figure is for 2022 quite shortly. But anyways, you see population of 277 in 2010, and you will see it's more or less stabilizing up to 2030, and then you start to see a decline in the size of the population. So that's what we're expecting, that the population is kind of going to slightly increase, stabilize in the 2030s, and then start to decline by 2040. So that's one trend, a decline in population, based, again, on current birth. Pyramids, but a pyramid has a kind of triangular look, and you can see that Barbados no longer has a triangular look. So the first blue and red chart is the population structure in 2010, last time we had a census. And we will see what it looks like when we get the census results soon, hopefully soon. But on the projections, the 2040, you will see, again, a decline in number of people under 15, even under 24. and then a growth of people over, I think it says 60 there, right? Over 60, and slightly more women than men, older women than older men. And you see the trend continuing for 2050. These are projections. So we've kind of shared with you the kind of main findings, the main demographic findings. And we want you to think about that online and think about the questions that you may want to ask, because we have a lot of data that we can share. So don't be reluctant to ask your questions. Now, apart from the population size and structure findings, we also try to think of what are some of the implications of those findings, as well as projections. So here are some, just maybe 6, but there are quite a lot of non-population related findings, non-demographic findings. So first of all, what we're seeing is that the number of young people in the labor force has declined by over 50%, which is a rather extreme amount. As a percentage of the labor force, youth comprised 20% in 1995 and 10% in 2017. So we are seeing a decline of young people coming in to the labor force. But we're also seeing that a significant percent of young people are not in employment, not in education, not in training, and that is like 18%. So that suggests to us that we have a significant number of young people who can be engaged and supported to be engaged in either employment, education, or training. So apart from that labor force statistic, those labor force statistics, we also were able to show in the report that we have increased expenditure on health services, social services, and social protection related to an aging population. If you think about social protection, a number of people may not have been in the labor force in a formal way. So they may be in the informal economy, as many people are, and not necessarily part of pension schemes. And so the non-contributory pension, which I think we've been hearing quite a bit about over the last few months, there will be certainly a demand on that. And of course on health services. And health services for Barbados and for a lot of the countries in the Caribbean, health services connected to aging is also connected to non-communicable diseases, hypertension, diabetes. And we have Dr. Murphy online who can also answer questions about that. And as Dr. Aline will tell us, in relation to housing stock, we have over 20,000 vacant residential lots and a rising level of vacancies in existing buildings. For the 2012 statistic is 12% of the housing stock vacant. Is that right, Dr. Aline? Yes. So just something to think about as an indicator of people either moving within Barbados or moving out of Barbados, and the implications for housing there. And we've also seen a population redistribution away from the coastal areas, resulting in new housing units in spaces which we traditionally have associated with agricultural production and indeed with food production. So also something for us to think about. And we're projecting that the waste produced is expected to rise also with an increase in population, but not even with an increase in population, just in the change in lifestyle. You see increase in waste, and waste connected to food, plastic bottles, plastic containers. So we've also did a little bit of a review of that. Okay, so that's what we kind of found in the situational analysis. We found many other things, and that report is also available for you all to have a look at. And so we went to the second part of the assignment, which was to develop a population policy. And some people have asked us, population policy in any event, is it the national development policy? What is it? So a population policy is definitely not a national development policy, which is a much broader, more comprehensive approach to thinking about how your country and the people in your country are going to prosper in a fair and equitable way. This population policy is just one piece of a development policy, and it generally tends to outline strategies that will increase the likelihood that a country, any country, continues to have a population size and ability to have a size and balanced structure. You already see in those words embedded that a population policy is part of future planning. It's about what are we projecting in the future? What do we need to be ahead of in the future? What do we need to fix ahead of the problem which we anticipate may come if things remain the same? So I just want to stress that this population policy is part of planning for the future. So what are the principles of this policy? I don't want to get too deeply into it, but I think it's important to say. We at the Commission, we try to think very carefully about the country that we are living in, the shared development aspirations, the history of this country, our continued quest for fairness, for equality, for ending poverty, for promoting opportunities, and that we do that through the instrument of what we call a social democratic state. So that's one of the principles of the policy. Has the primary responsibility, so that's the first R, the primary responsibility for development and for social protection of vulnerable populations. That the state, a social democratic state, also has a regulatory obligation with regard to the market. So we can think of having labor laws in place or non-discrimination laws in place, financial regulations, industrial policy. So the state is responsible for regulating to some extent, without intruding, but to some extent, individuals and collectives of individuals, groups, and enterprises. The third R for me is that the state has an obligation to regulate the use of natural resources to preserve benefits, the natural benefits for current and, very importantly, future generations. And then the fourth R for me and for the Commission is the redistributive R. The state has a redistributive obligation through its use of tax and non-tax measures because, we don't, which, draws down on water and the natural resources in a way that's not replenishable. I think, Dr. Allen, you can speak a little bit about that later on. No, we do not. So we have this clear policy objective, and we invite you to comment on it. This is very small print, so let me just go ahead. This policy has 3 policy goals, and I'm just going to go to them here. The first one is to maintain, oh boy. let's go back. Okay. The first one is that we're trying to maintain a population size and structure to sustain adequate levels of social care. So you see, care is a very big concept in this policy. How do we care for ourselves, and how do we care for each other, and how does the state care for us, all of us, in an interdependent way? So what kind of population size do we need to sustain adequate levels of care, productivity, labor force participation? The second one is around providing Barbadians and non-Barbadians living here now and in the future with opportunities for personal development. And the third goal, to promote integrated settlement development and safeguard the ecological balance. So just very quickly, to give you an idea of this is something I think that online we've had a lot of comment on already. The question of sustaining the population size to accomplish that social care that we need, productivity, labor force participation. So the Commission is suggesting three main ways to do that. Well, two main ways. One, which has to do with stabilizing your population. In other words, arresting the decline in population growth. And you can arrest the decline in population growth in really just two ways. One, bringing in people, and one, having more people. So we're just cognizant of that global fact. But in fact, the Commission is recommending, one, that we, to attract people to Barbados, we want to attract people to Barbados who are bringing in skills and expertise, and in particular in areas where we have shortages, skills shortages. So one, we are talking about attracting people back to Barbados, so extending the categories of persons entitled to citizenship and permanent residence. A lot of us have maybe a family who migrated maybe 2 or 3 generations ago, but they want to be connected to Barbados and there's no pathway to citizenship or permanent residence, so how can we fix that? Secondly, manage migration, to bring people with capabilities and resources to invest in Barbados, but to do that in a way that does not dislocate or disadvantage those who are here now. And then we have some recommendations on retaining young people here. We also understand, I should say, that Barbados is one of those countries with the highest rates of emigration out. So there are some UN statistics that there are 30% of the Barbadian population of Barbadians living outside of Barbados. So how do we encourage Barbadians to stay, not to leave, especially young people, and how do we encourage those to come back? Maybe not permanently, but temporarily. We all now do the remote work. So that's a set of recommendations around bringing people here in the context of what does the country need. And then the second one is supporting family policy to support those people who may want to have children but are unable to do that because of financial reasons or social reasons or fertility reasons. We heard quite a lot in our consultations of men and women who are saying that they would like to have children, but fertility technology is too expensive for them. So we also address, for those who want children, that there may be some ways that the state can support. And this is the second one, taking care of Barbadians who are here now. We speak a lot about sharing the care responsibilities, recognizing caretakers of children and of the elderly and of the sick. We speak about fiscal incentives for caregivers, but also just moral and emotional support for people who do caregiving. We recommended the adoption of the draft National Policy on Aging, which is an excellent document. I don't know if it's been adopted yet. And then we're also recommending reform to the education sector to deal with the dropout rate of young people from education and from training. How can you attract them back into the formal economy through quality education and opportunities for technical vocational training? And then lastly, our goal on promotion of integrated settlements. If they're going to, even for the people who are here now, and if you want to bring in more people, you're going to have to be assured that you have the infrastructure in place, that you have water supply, that your waste management works, that you have transportation in place, but also that you make sure that you have the right balance between housing stock and land for agriculture and just for green spaces and for recreation. So we make a number of recommendations about an ecosystem-based intervention. So that's about it, some cross-cutting themes. We understand that there has to be an approach to education that takes us away from a singular focus of testing and certification. So testing and certification are important, but it's not all. And that education should leave, children should leave schools, young people should leave schools with the critical thinking skills, with resilience, with a great appreciation for their role in the care economy, how that they also are caregivers and have obligations to their communities. We speak about, the sharing of the responsibility for care. We know for the most part, women are the ones caring for children and the elderly, and that we think has to be rebalanced. And also that environmental management is something that we have to think about as we think about adjusting the population where they are and the size of the population. So I think that's the end. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Clark. Let's begin with a few comments that we had coming in from the social media, and two questions that seem to be fairly popular on Facebook and Instagram. The first one, how can people be attracted to Barbados to live and work? We had that coming in, or questions related to that particular subtopic coming in. And then how many people, how many more people does Barbados need? And in relation to the first question, a question related to that, that someone I spoke to earlier gave a comment. They said that in the 70s, 1970s and so, a lot of solutions were coming to Barbados to maybe to cut canes and working the sugar crop and so. More recently, we had Guyanese coming to Barbados. What does Barbados have to offer in terms of other programs, economic things to attract persons to work? So maybe one of the commissioners might want to address that particular one, and then the one, how many more persons does Barbados need? I know somewhere in the policy, I saw a number of 185,000 persons. So maybe one of the commissioners could address those two questions. Any takers?
What do you want to do? I could say why 185. Yeah, I could say why 185. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. We're just sort of looking amongst ourselves to organize for answering some of these questions. So one of the questions you said is why 185,000?
No, I saw somewhere in the policy in relation to the question, how many more people does Barbados need? I saw somewhere it says 185,000. Is that the figure we're working with, and maybe how did we come up with that figure?
Okay. Well, you know, that's something that the Commission really struggled with, because what we are trying to get at is the decline in number of people of working age. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, people of working age are also the caregivers within their families and within their communities, but they're also the persons who are involved in the labor force. They're also the persons who are taking care of the environment. They're also persons who are paying taxes. They're also persons who are consuming. So it's also the working age people are a source of taxation, either through income tax or through consumption taxes like value-added tax. So we know that what we also need is to maintain a really good dependency ratio, so you have enough people of working age who are there to take care of those who are young and those who are older who may need care, because let's be clear, not all older people need care. I'm also of that older person category. I don't need it yet. I suppose I'll need it in the future. But so we don't want to say that all older people need care, but we know that there comes a time where we will need more support from our family members and from the state. So how do we have that age structure where we have people who are either graduating into the labor force in sufficient numbers or come into the labor force in sufficient numbers so that we have that vibrancy and contribution that people of working age do give a country. It's very difficult to say what's an optimal age size. There's a certain level of perhaps arbitrariness in that outside of a development framework. And so but it is clear that there are some sectors of the economy where we need people with expertise. And I think that the Ministry of Labor has been analyzing the areas in the sector, in the economy where there are unmet labor needs. Having said that, what does that mean in terms of numbers? To try to maybe get around the arbitrariness of this, the essential arbitrariness of this, sort of pulling a number from the atmosphere, which we did not want to do, and which we definitely have not done, what we thought to ourselves was, let's think of a baseline as a consideration. So if Barbados had maintained its, so Barbados, as I said, has the fertility rate of Barbados went below what we call replacement rate in 1980. So a replacement rate, and of course these are just average figures, 2.1 children per woman at the end of her reproductive years. If you have that, then your population can regenerate itself from one generation to the next. But Barbados' fertility rate dropped below 2.1 in 1980, and in fact has never recovered from that. In fact, it's really a downward trend. And we understand the downward trend because women have taken up use of contraception. That has been so very important to the development of Barbados for women and families to be able to control their size. Absolutely a positive thing. Also allowed women to pursue educational opportunities, but the result of that has been this decline in birth rate. So we're saying if Barbados had remained at that replacement rate, what would be the population size in 2020? And from our demographic statistics, the population size would have been 360,000. So we kind of said, let us, as a kind of a baseline, let us think about having a population size by maybe 2050, which would be equivalent to what Barbados would have if it had maintained its replacement rate. So that's what we're working with. It's not. It's just one way of thinking about it. You can think about it another way as well. You can think about other societies or countries in the region or in the world which have, robust development structures that we are interested in, and what does their population density look like. That's another way of looking at it. We didn't want to go that route. For example, if we had the same population density of Bermuda, our population size now would be over 500,000. Similarly, St. Martin, which some people go St. Martin in the Caribbean with a much higher population density than Barbados. But we're not suggesting that, because that's such a big shift from what we have now and what has been so important to Barbados to control its population. So we have opportunities for everyone as much as we can get that, as well as the ecological balance. So I think that's one of our thinkings about if we were to recommend a size over time, like future planning over 20, 30 years, that would be something that we could think about. But of course, this is up for debate and discussion. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to say anything about that.
Okay, I noticed that when you were talking about reaching that 185,000, you were talking about the replacement level. So it seems to be suggesting that you're going to reach that number by 2050 through fertility. But what about the other factors like migration? And I know the policy did speak to manage migration, because one would be short-term, the fertility would be more long-term, reachable in the long term through fertility, but in short term, right now we get nurses from Cuba, we get nurses from Guyana, we get nurses from Africa. So if there's a short term need to meet some specific economic goal, I know that I don't want to say import, we encourage persons to come here to work, but in the long run, let me just say that the suggestion is that other things will remain equal, because don't forget migration and also mortality. And migration sometimes is an outlet for persons who are not finding the kind of jobs and things that they want here, so therefore they leave. So maybe you can do a little more comment on that.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. It's so important you ask this question, and it tells you how, you can miscommunicate when you don't intend to, which I clearly just did.
Right.
Because we're not talking about 185,000 births in Barbados. We're saying if we had maintained the replacement rate, that's what our population size would look like. It would be larger, it would be increased by that number. So that is just a way for us to think about what the size of the population would be like had we maintained replacement rate. We're not saying that we need 185,000 babies at all, but we're saying that some of the ways to increase a population, not necessarily to 185,000, but if you need people in the labor force, one of the ways to do that is through managed migration. So in fact, that's the major way, because there's no way people make their own decisions about whether they want to have children based on what's in their life. We're so committed to that self-determination and autonomy. And I think it's really important for us to reiterate that the Commission is not recommending that anyone has children, far less for 185,000 of them. Not at all. We're saying that the way that you can think about that you may need more people to participate in your labor force, then that really your main way of doing that is through a managed migration. And alongside, for those people who may wish to have children, you can create some enabling environment for that to happen. But it's entirely discretionary, and we have made no recommendation on people having children, neither targets for fertility at all. This report, very important to understand.
Okay. All right, another question that came in, and I know the policy answered that question to some extent. Why does Barbados need a population policy?
Did he answer that question?
As I indicated earlier, I believe Barbados has always had some sort of population policy, not an explicit policy where all of the policies and programs targeting the components of population change and the things and the implications have been in one document. There has also always been some sort of a population. Even, I believe, during slavery, there would have been a population policy to increase the number of slaves through breeding. And different countries have countries have policies depending on what they want to achieve. For example, China. We know that China had a one-child policy. We know that some other European countries had a policy to increase births, and therefore they give incentives to some of the families and so to have. I think in England that they give apartments and all kind of things to young mothers. And even in the United States, they give housing support and so to women. Unfortunately, that has the effect of chasing away the men, because I believe a man cannot be present if the government is giving them welfare and things like that. So different countries have different policies to achieve certain goals in relation to population. So the question that has been posed, why does Barbados need a population policy, an explicit policy at this particular point in time?
So, Mr. Ford, as you would have said rightly, countries do implement population policies for different reasons and at different times. And in the case of Barbados, this policy has been developed, and this is more around resources and making sure that Barbados has the resources that we need to provide certain things like healthcare, education, to support the economy, economic development, poverty reduction. So looking at the population and making sure that, as we mentioned, there are things like improved, we have care resources. So there are a number of things, obviously, that increasing having a population policy will help the government to deal with as a country. So that's the basis, really, of having a population policy at this point. One of the things, obviously, that we would have found, of course, is that with the population at this size that it's had some benefits already, benefits in terms of reducing the human footprint and in terms on the ecological balance in Barbados, but we're balancing that now with the need for other resources, as we would have said. So I hope that answers the question a little bit.
To some extent.
Right.
All right. Two related
Another
questions.
question that we need to look at. Somebody wanted to know why people would want to come to Barbados.
Why people?
Would want to come to Barbados.
Right. You want to answer that?
Yeah.
Right, Mr. Rudder want to answer the question why people will want to come to Barbados. What do we have to offer that will make people want to come to Barbados?
Yeah, I particularly find that to be an interesting question because we seem to have a very negative position as to why people will want to come to Barbados. I want to advance that the quality of life in Barbados is extremely high. I'm talking about looking at it objectively, right? There are many things which are available in Barbados. There are many things in Barbados which function efficiently, despite all the complaints we have. And many visitors who come to Barbados, particularly high-end visitors, are invariably impressed with the quality of life in Barbados, right? That quality of life which extends over entertainment, the quality of our beaches and so on. They always comment on the friendliness of the Barbadian people, which I don't necessarily find to be that way, but the reality is that a lot of people are impressed with the quality of life in Barbados. And I believe that as Barbadians, we need to look objectively at what obtains in Barbados, right? We are always very critical of any and everything. And to me, that has a negative effect on the country's ability to develop positively. On the other hand, because of the fact that the quality of life here is high, surprisingly so for people from big countries, we are in a position, if we have a managed migration policy that looks at our developmental needs, we can be in a position to target those persons who will find this environment conducive to their development. And the fact that they may be comfortable to work here, as may be seen from the welcome stamp and so on. But this thing about crying down the country and so on, which that really amongst the why people will want to come here. Because people have been coming to Barbados for years and years. That is one of the reasons why our tourism has been effective as it has been. Because people come here, they're comfortable here. The quality of the hotels has been, the refurbishments and so on, have been redounding to the benefit of the country in a very significant way. So I don't believe that there's any need to question why people will want to come to Barbados. And I believe that what we need to do is to seek to exploit the fact that people will find it comfortable and necessary to come to a place like Barbados to live. And if we could put that in place, then a lot of the deficits we have in terms of skills and so on, I believe that we could avoid that.
All right. Maybe a comment that came in, we have to qualify maybe what the person was trying to say. Because one person asked, well, for example, recently there was talk about maybe reducing employment in the SOEs. I don't know, that's what some person is suggesting here. So if you're reducing employment, those persons are, some of those persons, are maybe not all, are put on the breadline. Then a person wanted to come to Barbados because migration, there are pull and push factors. So if the person's coming to Barbados, there must be some pull factor. So if one of the pull factors for any person migrating is to find employment, if already people are saying, well, the young people can't find work, and already some of the people in the SOEs might be on the breadline, then when I come here, what will I do? You know, it's all right to come for vacation and things like that, but when I come to live and to, you know, raise my family, what is there for me in terms of employment? Those are some of the questions I see coming through here.
So I think, I think thank you very much, Mr. Reddy, for that endorsement of our of the attractiveness of Barbados as just a place to live and also, you know, experience the social solidarity of the country. I think what the person who's asking the question is also saying, why would they come here? What are we offering to attract people who are working age here? And I think that really is an important question. I think, first of all, I think we have to start with who do we want to attract here? There are countries that take a social capital approach to manage migration. So they say if you are, generally speaking, someone with skills in areas that we kind of generally want, and those skills could be in the economy, it could be in culture, it could be in education, wherever your skills are, and you're going to be a value add, let's say, to the country. That's an approach to manage migration. The other countries that take a much more targeted approach is to say, we are going to bring people in here who will fit into the labor market in the areas where we do not have the required levels of people to participate to fill those gaps. So I think that's something that we have to be thinking about. We've recommended a managed migration policy, but the actual content of that policy has to be devised by the relevant ministry. We are saying this is one way to increase your population of working age people, but now the detail of who and from where and how has to be developed in the relevant policy space. But again, we also do say that migration has to be regular and orderly and fair not fair to those who are here now, but also fair to those who are coming. So we have to not have exploitative working conditions at all for persons who are coming here. They must have, if they come here with their families, they must have access to school, have access to the healthcare systems on whatever terms the managed migration policy decides. But those are people who move are concerned that their families can move with them and that there will be space for their family, especially children, to thrive. So the policy makes some sort of broad recommendations for an outline of a managed migration policy.
Okay, in relation to that same managed migration policy, somebody is suggesting that a parent who acquired Barbadian citizenship by descent should be able to pass along Barbadian citizenship to his or her children born outside of Barbados. I think somewhere along the line in the last few years, I heard the government suggesting that Barbadian citizenship should not only be extended to first generation, second generation, that was the children of persons born in Barbados, but also the grandchildren. Did you find that as part of your findings and so as well?
Well, the
as a
policy does recommend, because we know that the government had been considering draft legislation, and I think Mr. Hinkson, I don't want to put him on the spot, but he was very much part of that, leading that thinking. I don't know, Mr. Hinkson, do you want to say anything or no? I'm not. Yes. Okay, so that kind of broad legislation was recommended that persons born outside of Barbados with either grandparents or even great-grandparents could be eligible for citizenship. So there's a range of recommendations about how you recognize the connection that people have to Barbados because of their ancestry, and can you create a pathway for them to come here to live and to work and to contribute, either through residence or through citizenship. Similarly, that there are people from the Caribbean who have been here for many, many years through different pathways. How do you recognize that and create some stability for Caribbean people who have been here, either through residence or through extension of entitlement to citizenship? And then also making things easier for persons who may want to come here because they are bringing resources. We've also made some recommendations on that.
I would also like to suggest that if we're looking at this thing as constructively as possible, that within the framework of CARICOM, that it should be possible for the exchange of skills between islands as a matter of reciprocity, whereby we are in need of a particular worker in Barbados, that worker if available in St. Lucia, Trinidad, or wherever, should be able to come to Barbados and work. And similarly, there should be that freedom of movement for Barbadian workers who want to work abroad. I believe that if it could be managed that way, in terms of the supply of skills throughout the region, that we'd be on a very constructive path.
And are you offering education and health facilities for their families who might accompany them, or you just bring in the worker themselves?
Well, reciprocity is reciprocity. I accommodate you, you accommodate me. If we look, for example, at the availability of skills through CXC and so on, there's skilled people all over the Caribbean. And in many ways, I believe that the quality of life in Barbados is superior to many of the other islands.
Right. There's a question about, I believe it relates to participation rates among young people. What are the plans for that 18% young people not engaged? I don't know if you gave a comment about certain percentage of young people not engaged. So what are the plans for that 18% of young people who are not engaged? Can we start training them to fill the void of those disciplines we are short on?
Yes, I think that's almost the most urgent thing to do, to ensure that young people have opportunities to participate constructively in their society, in their community, in their society, in their culture, and in the economy, and also find ways to take care of themselves and to take care of others, as young people of all generations have done. So the Commission is quite concerned about the number of young people who are unemployed, and not only those who are unemployed, but those who are outside of education and training. And I would imagine, we don't have any more recent data, but I would imagine that the COVID years and the COVID years which affected the economy so very badly would have increased the numbers of people who have fallen out of formal employment, who may be finding it difficult to find their way back in. But to come back to, so we're saying ensuring, reducing unemployment levels amongst young people is such an important and urgent thing, and also finding the ways to motivate young people back into education, back into training or vocational training, so that they can find sectors in the economy that they themselves can grow or participate in. So really important. So we're saying that the education sector should really be thinking very carefully, because we all know who achieves in the education sector and who does not, and who falls by the wayside. We have to try to find a way of really dramatically decreasing those who fall by the wayside. That the education sector is a place that we can fairly say that all of us, or the vast majority of us, can leave the education sector with feelings of self-confidence, self-esteem, capabilities to do a range of things. And so we made some recommendations on some work which needs to be done on the education sector. But in relation to the young people who are outside of the workforce, also to have a plan for encouraging them back into either formal education or technical and vocational education. And we also are thinking that we have to find ways of building partnerships with the private sector, so that young people find places to grow, to go for internships, for working opportunities. So we make a range of recommendations around particularly addressing those young people who are not in education and not in training and not in employment, because we think that really is a very urgent priority.
Right. Did your research or your consultations, I don't know if you had various interest groups. Was there a youth interest group, and did they give any indication that they prefer to be entrepreneurs rather than to be employees for somebody else? Is that why a number of them are not engaged? Because they prefer to be their own boss, they prefer to have their own business, and are there measures being put in place to facilitate that?
Does anyone want to take that?
Trying to remember from our consultations, but I don't think that came out that strongly. The youth did come out and talk about ensuring that there are opportunities. But whether or not that was within the formal education sector, whether that was in employment, working as an employee for someone, or being an entrepreneur, the focus really was on ensuring that there were those opportunities. And so just to support what Roberta had said just now, it is important. We thought it was critically important because I know people are talking quite a bit about, looking at the comments online, talking quite a bit about displacing young people now, young Barbadians with the managed migration, but we think they go hand in hand, and that's why we put so much emphasis on those cross-cutting themes like education reform, because bringing more young people into the labor force, whether that is how we provide those opportunities, we work that out. But whether that is through entrepreneurship, whether that is through getting them into employment with the public-private partnerships that Roberta was mentioning, it is important because it brings those resources that the population policy is seeking to harness, brings them back into play.
Because I've heard comments, that in the past, a person, was quite prepared to go and work, in the government for 20 or 30 years and get a pension, and even in the private sector to work for long periods. But it seems as though, I don't know, I don't have empirical evidence to prove that. Number of young people, don't have any plans to stay in a job 10, 15, 20 years. They work 10 years here, maybe get a little experience and work another and move on. Could that in some way be contributing to the low participation rates, or just simply that there are not enough jobs to go around?
I am not necessarily convinced about this question of not enough jobs to go around. The document speaks to educational reform. I believe that the problem lies in the fact that a significant number of young people have not acquired the type of training which will give them the drive and the strength to venture into other areas. Right? Now, in Barbados, there's quite a lot of talk about entrepreneurs and so on. And I believe that we have a misguided notion about what entrepreneurship is all about. Barbados is probably the only place in the world where people will tell you that they're entrepreneurs but expect government to support them. As far as I'm aware, an entrepreneur is one who undertakes the management as well as the risk involved with business, right? Because in many ways, far too many people in our beautiful country are risk averse. So they're afraid to take chances. And the education which they have received through the years has always told them, well, you go to school, you get 8 or 9 certificates, you go to university, then you're going to work for somebody, whether it be government or the private sector, right? But what would be interesting I don't believe that the parents have any great difficulty in encouraging the children to enter into the businesses, right? But we, the other people in Barbados, have that difficulty. So I'm saying that the educational reform, a significant part of that educational reform has to do with attitudinal change, which is always very difficult, right? But I am very skeptical of this notion about entrepreneurs in Barbados.
All right. Do we have any more questions? Do we have more questions coming in from the online audience, or?
Mr. Ford, if I can just maybe add some things on that last point. I think we have to ask young people they have to be participating in this conversation about what are the impediments for them to be engaged in the formal and informal economy, and what it would take for them to have the capabilities to contribute in the way that they want to contribute. And I think that has to be our first approach. Always listen to each other. And the world is, I don't want to say a harder place, but it seems to me that young people now are facing challenges that perhaps other generations, each generation faces its own challenges, but this generation really certainly is facing its specific challenges because it has to confront, well, it has confronted a global pandemic, the likes of which we have not seen in our lifetime, and all the implications of that for disruption of education, disruption of trajectories of development. They're also facing the whole question of the climate disorder, the climate crisis, and the distortions that come with that in our economies. So, and certainly, maybe previous generations, certainly of my generation, there was always a sense that the public sector was a place that you could get a job. But that's not so anymore either. So I think young people are facing a complexity of issues. We have to listen really very carefully to what they're telling us about what they want to do and the contributions that they want to make. And then we have to then think about how does the education sector create for all of us that self-confidence, that self-esteem, the capabilities to contribute to our families, the capabilities to contribute to our communities and to our countries. And I think that really is what we should be thinking about when we're thinking, well, we have been thinking about that in education, but we have to continue thinking about that in the changing world that we're in.
The whole question of entrepreneurship, as Mr. Weller was saying, in the past, we had a lot of joiners, a lot of tailors, a lot of people like that, seamstress and so. People never given the big name of entrepreneur, but really and truly they supported their families through primary, secondary, and university education on those things. What is being put in place to encourage, because there's a complaint, I've heard from time to time, a lot of joiners are saying that, only quite recently I was talking to somebody and they said that, right now we are importing a lot of cheap, useless furniture, that, we have good mahogany and things like that here, but we don't have anybody following in the footsteps of those persons. Whereas in places like Korea, you have master joiners, master masons, master tailors, whatever. And these things are being taught in the what is equivalent to our polytechnics and whatever. So these young people come out, and there are two paths, as the TVET would show you, there are two paths to reach a particular goal. Experience, you can go and because of your experience, like a lot of masons, they didn't have any real formal training, and that from maybe the Polytechnic or whatever, or the skills training people. But over the years, by watching their grandfather or their uncle or whatever, now they're able to build a building. When they look at they can read plans, because when they look at a plan, a draftsman might draw a plan, you draw a roof, and they can look at it and see that roof ain't gonna work, or something like that, or the building is laid, and they can see that there are problems there. So what is being put in place to certify these people so that then they could work here in Barbados, could work anywhere in the region or wherever, because they now are certified, and they can get, I think in Korea and those kind of places, once you become a master craftsman, then you attract a higher payment or whatever for your skills. So in your research, do you find any policies like that being put in place?
As I said before, we were doing population policy. We're not really engaged in industrial policy or employment policy. But we do make broad recommendations for policy development in those spaces.
You see, the reason why I asked that, and I said some of the questions are coming in online, sometimes I'm modifying them. But if we are looking to address labor force problem, then you're looking for people, more and more people. You want to improve labor force participation rates. And if one of the problems is that young people are not attracted to the traditional type of employment. If you can get more and more of them employed in these types of employment where they're their own, as it were, boss, and maybe have one or two of their friends, maybe something like a cooperative or something like that. Your friend is into agriculture, you're into agriculture, and one body might have a van. It could be a regular van, or it could be a van that can transport pork carcasses or black belly lamb carcass or something like that. I got a feeling that once young people are given the incentive and the support to get in these types of occupations, that they might be more interested. Let me see if anything else come in.
Can you pass that to him for me?
Somebody asked, what resources are available to those seeking citizenship by descent? I believe it should be the other way around. People wanting citizenship by descent should be bringing resources rather than, more so bringing resources rather than wanting resources. Because a lot of Barbadians who second and third generation are doing very, very well overseas. So even if they come and set up maybe a clinic or something, a clinic or something like that, they might have their own business, a business back in New York, Canada, whatever, but come down here and set up a business, and they come down here a few months, a year, or a few weeks, and so those are the kind of things that second and third generation Barbadians can be involved in, honestly. All right, I'm sure that somebody will want to ask the question, if we are going to increase the population size, what about the infrastructure, what carrying capacity? There must be carrying capacity issues. What are in terms of road networks, in terms of housing? I know in Japan, in Singapore, and I'm not hearing it secondhand, I spent a little short while in Singapore. And I think the planning in Singapore is replace a 30-story building with a 50-story building. Planning in Singapore is the buildings in town, the first 10 stories would be commercial, and the other 40 stories would be residential to move people back into the cities. So that is the type of planning you find in Singapore and Korea and some of those countries. So maybe one of the panelists could address questions in terms of the infrastructural planning in relation to accommodating increased population size and so on.
I can take that. Chair?
Please.
So as we look to increase the population, manage the population by increasing numbers, at the moment our land is a scarce resource, and we've been constantly talking about balancing population growth and our natural environment. Land is one of our limited resources, and at the moment we have one style of housing, our preferred style of housing, where we have a detached unit, and we keep repeating that model over and over and taking up more and more land space. I think in the context of a bigger population, as we look towards what we're going to do, we've said the policy recommends a framework for doing that, a more integrated approach to doing it, and suggests that perhaps it may require a revisit of how we do housing, where we live, what it looks like, and also integrating that, as Mr. Fort suggested, Singapore, and how they mix commercial with residential. But the policy recommends a framework where we seek to consolidate a lot of our basic resources in one place. So if you're living somewhere, you should not have to get into your car and drive somewhere to get basic groceries, or to get a doctor, or to go to a nursery school or care. So the aim is in the future to suggest a framework that is far more integrated, where we see, rather than dormitory settlements as we have now, several houses with nothing there and no kind of service, you see in the future housing developments that actually integrate places of work, basic services like your basic shopping, your daycare, your medical facilities, and things like that. And then that starts to have a very different look on the landscape. It may take a little getting used to, but that is the idea in terms of going forward. And infrastructurally, the policy also recommends that by doing so, by actually creating an environment, some people in some European countries, they look at it as a 15-minute city or the 20-minute city, which means that within 15 minutes you can walk to any basic need or some workplace. And so they compact it, and I think Singapore follows the same model. So every few miles, you see the same thing repeated, which is housing, employment, medical, schools. They're all there. You get on the subway and go another 2 miles, it's the same thing. So you can walk to everything that you need quite efficiently once you're there, or get on the subway and move. Now, obviously, we're not talking about subways here in Barbados, but certainly we are talking about settlements that are more highly serviced so that it reduces the individual car usage on the road, and by reducing the movements and doing more transit and more perhaps mass transit, then we perhaps get more efficient in getting where we need to get. So things like that are very important in terms of the policy and an approach, a more integrative, setting up a framework for how you could address those things. And I think I might like to add at this point too, in terms of using social and economic evaluation tools to give you more information as you make decisions about development. So for perhaps everybody's familiar with an environmental and social impact assessment, their cost-benefit analyses, there are things like that that the policy is recommending be used as tools to help analyze where you put what and what people would need, and that is a very participatory type approach in terms of getting information from the very people that are going to use the spaces, because there's no way that you can have a population with managed migration and have our housing and our employment areas look the same. And of course, to be balanced that in terms of resource management, some people may be concerned with human interaction and the things that come up from having more human beings on the landscape, more sewage, more runoff, more solid waste disposal. So all those things are things that we have to look at as we go forward in terms of shaping what a future with a bigger population would look like. Yes, and just a quick add to as I talk about the land, but obviously the land and the sea are very closely connected, so whatever runs off from the water and the land can affect our coastal environment, and our coral reefs are very precious to us. As those are nurseries for our fish. There are the things that people come to dive and see the life systems on them, the marine systems. So all those are things that I think going forward, the policy is saying, let us set up a framework to see how we approach this and use tools that will help us to shape the landscape a bit differently and manage it in a more integrated way.
Are you aware of the roof-to-reef project that the government was looking at? I think that addresses some of those concerns in terms of the relationship between runoff from the land and the degradation of the near shore, and also if you can capture some of the water that's coming off the roofs, then you may be able to use that water to help to mitigate against our shortage. Did you have discussions with Mr. Marshall, Ricardo Marshall?
Yes, we certainly did, and we totally endorse that approach in the policy itself. It's described in there, utilizing that roof-to-reef approach, and to make sure that we're fully integrated with respect to what is on the land and what is in the marine environment, and how we can reuse some of that water and stop some of it, by natural means to get reabsorbed into the coastal air before it hits the marine zone.
Okay. We had a couple of questions coming from Ashley. One of them was the one that spoke to resources being available for people seeking citizenship by descent. I think she's still probably looking for an answer for that. And she also asked, how can I start a business in Barbados although I am currently overseas?
Well, we can't answer that question, Mr. Ford. But certainly we take note of the question and we will route it to the relevant government department that may be able to provide that.
Right, because certainly as part of the managed migration, you don't only want to bring in people, say, for nurses or because you have to work in the transport board and things. If a person brings their skills, they can set up a business and then they in turn can employ other persons as well. So you need to attract those kind of people to come with resources. Mm-hmm. And I think there was some concern recently about the bank. Maybe the governor of the central bank was talking about how difficult it was to set up an account. And so that's something, if you want to facilitate persons who want to come here and live and work, if we have the environment that Mr. Rudder refers to, the perfect environment to live and work, then you also have to be able to, because I know there have been some certain concerns about our rating on the the ease of setting up business. So clearly, we will want to, without compromising our security and so, we will want to make it easier for persons to set up businesses because we have a whole lot of islands in the Caribbean with a lot of similar infrastructure, similar, not maybe in some cases as easy to live and work as Barbados, but some of those governments would roll out the red carpet. So, you know, we have to be in a position also, as I said before, train out the baby to make sure that we lay the kind of carpet as well to accommodate these persons. All right, we have a few persons here who want to make comments or ask questions. You can go to the mic and do so. Thank you very much for coming.
Good evening.
Could you identify yourself or your organization or?
My name is Vicki Whitaker. I work for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs.
Right.
My contribution is a few, in no particular order. I saw you had already stated about flexibility in work. That was one of mine. I do not know what is keeping us boxed into the regular hours of a working day or a day's work. I think we need to get out of probably the 8:15 to 4:30, the 9 to 5, so we can get a lot more flexibility where parents can be with their children. If one person is working shift, then I can go in later because I know my partner or whoever, the other parent, the other person, the household grandmother, whoever, is able to assist. That's one.
Yeah.
Two, I think the process to allow parents to homeschool could encourage or would encourage parents to, I guess, have another child or so. I don't know. Some allowances, or at least the allowance, is given for interest-free loan to a certain category of persons. I am wondering, from my point of view, for those as civil servants, as a single parent, the same way how you have a requirement for a certain type of vehicle, if you cannot give parents, single parents or whoever, the same interest-free loan to have a vehicle of a certain CCs, I wouldn't be able to expand on that because I don't know that same opportunity. I left work to come here from Warren's, and as you can see, I got here late. I won't see what type of vehicle I took to get here because it wouldn't be legal. And in me coming here is like a mother leaving work. She will get to the nursery to pick up her child late. She will have to pay a late fee depending. That is more money every day coming out her pocket.
Yeah.
Because she just cannot get to pick up her child or children on time. The thing about nurseries, I remember I registered my child for nursery when I was pregnant. My child is 16 years old, and I haven't heard from them. I wish that parents to be, or parents who are in the low income bracket, would be given first option to let their children attend the nursery. I know firsthand of persons who are in a higher income bracket who are allowed to get into the nursery, allow their children to go to the nursery, and then the parent who cannot afford to pay the $80 and $90 are left out. So the child probably goes, however, when they have the $90, or their child doesn't go. So you just find the children home running around.
So your question is then?
Can we have some sort of structure put in place so that the parents or low incomes parents scale can have first option?
Okay.
The
This
next-
policy is designed what to increase persons working in the labor force, especially women?
We would believe so, yes.
Okay.
And a profession that I hold very close to my heart, nursing. The nursing is predominantly female. You leave home before the sun comes up. You will go back home when the sun goes down. I can tell you because I have had to do it. I have left nursing for many reasons. The biggest one was because at the time, and I'm not just gonna, all right. For me, I did not have the extended family for me to be able to cope with working the night shift, the overnight shift. I think nurses need help. They need a lot more support.
So what are you suggesting?
Well, I can't give all the suggestions. I'm just gonna
Give a few.
I give a few others, but for this one, honestly, I think you need to speak to the nurses. The nursing profession was a lady with no children, no husband. That was what it was. We are supposed to be progressing. So we want the population to grow. So a nurse, she has a family now. But you still want us to balance and perform, and every other woman on this earth to balance and perform like we have no other responsibilities. It cannot happen. It is not fair. It simply isn't. And this being the month for females, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is my contribution.
Yeah.
All right.
You want to respond? Paul?
Are we taking this just as comments or do you want to respond?
I want to thank Ms. Whitaker for that eloquent contribution. I think you expressed so very well the stresses that parents have in balancing really the primary responsibility of taking care of their family with also another important responsibility of contributing to the society and also generating income, which is needed for the family. And especially the single parent and especially women who predominantly have responsibility for care of children, for the sick and the elderly. I want to assure you that the draft policy has paid special attention to that scenario. We've made quite a few recommendations, really quite a lot of overlap with what you yourself have recommended today. I just want to speak to a few of them. We did speak specifically to the question of daycares and nurseries, high-quality nurseries for parents, but I certainly take your point that some prioritization has to be given to those who are the low-income end of the spectrum because, you know, of course, the needs are greater and the capacities are less. So I think that that is something that we can take into account when we do the revision of the draft policy. But we've also recommended child benefit subsidies for low-income parents, and in particular single parents, whether women, whether men, subsidized childcare. We've talked about subsidized housing as well for people with children. And then we've done a lot, we've made quite a few recommendations of what we call family-friendly workplace policies. And I wrote down what you said because I think we might want to even use it somehow as a quote in the policy when you said that women are expected to balance and perform like we have no other responsibilities. And in quite a few of the consultations that we've had last year, both women and men talked about, the pressure that they feel, the stress that they feel, because school starts more or less at the same time as workplaces. And, of course, schools end a little earlier in the workday, but then what do you do with children, especially young children who are waiting for you to leave the work to come and pick them up? So we have to be really thinking, as you say, a lot more creatively about how we do that time management and create flexibility for parents to take care of their responsibilities in a way that is less stressful while still finding the ways to contribute in the workplace with productivity, the expected productivity. So those things have to be balanced. So I just want to thank you for your intervention, and we've taken notes, and we will review the policy through this prism. I don't know if you want to say anything on that?
I want to address the first question or comment that she made because in a previous life in the Ministry of the Civil Service, I know the question of flexible working arrangements was discussed, and it was discussed before COVID, and it was not a government-only policy. There was a committee comprising persons from the public sector, private sector, the unions, which look at flexible working relationships, and some good recommendations were made, and the unions have always been putting things on the table to, in relation to flexible working relationships. So maybe we need to look at that, dust it off, and look at it a little bit more because clearly, and even without having a policy, there's certain businesses, even in government, where if you have an elderly parent and you have to wait until a caregiver gets there at 8:30 and you're required to get work at 8:15, the head of the department, permanent secretary or whoever will say, okay, I allow you to come in at 9, but then you might have to work a little later. But if you want to come in you were supposed to get in at 8:15, you want to come at 9 and still leave at 4, that's not going to work unless you have, you agree to work a shorter working day and get paid for a shorter working day. So these are things that we have to look at, but it would be limited by the nature of the job, one, because clearly if you are a receptionist and work begins at 8:15 and finishes at 4:30, if you come in at 9 and work to 5, between 8:15 and 9, who will be covering your desk? And between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, what would you be answering? So depending on the nature of the job. But if you have the kind of job where your contact with the public is limited and, clearly you can work from home, there might be some flexibility in terms of the number of days you enter the office, the number of days you're at home. So depending on as I said, the nature of the job and the thing that you work with, there may be some flexibility. I know some businesses, both in public and private sector, say, well, okay, there's a core period that everybody should be there. So everybody should be there, say, from 10 to 3 or something like that, barring a lunch period. But I know that there has been work in that area. Okay. Anybody else with a question? You want to ask a question or your question has been represented? Go ahead. State your name and raise your question.
My name is Mark Skeet, right?
Right.
I want to know the effects of things like legality of abortions, right? And, right, how that would affect, with regard to numbers, those that were approved and so on, the numbers, how that affect the population. So, right? And then you have place like Polytechnic, right? Where the government have a system where they have the university called it Barbados, right? Where they try to make this thing a more upscale, more eccentric sort of place where, as far as qualification is concerned, right? For people to gravitate towards higher education, right? You find that people who apply, or children, people who have children who apply for the children to attend the Polytechnic, right? Those who are really desirous don't necessarily get the opportunity to get into Polytechnic, right? Right now the government is embarking on a lot of projects, right, which require artisans and so on, right? And I don't know if you have the numbers, you know, to work in those areas, you know, because the level of training, because another thing too that the government, the education system, which you have 60% people leaving school without qualifications, right? And only 40% or so who gain qualifications, right? And they find that persons who try to get in these areas to learn skills as artisans and so on don't necessarily get the opportunity, right? So I think it depends on if you have a godfather or something. So many people that get into these areas through those processes don't necessarily go through to the end of these programs, right? Mm-hmm. They sort of drop out, and the people that really want to get in don't necessarily get in, right? Mm-hmm. And find that the children that really want to get in to learn skills, you know, that will contribute, you know, in areas like being artisans and so on, they don't get into these institutions, right? Another areas too is that sometimes people who get opportunity to work in the private sector and so on, when they get in these areas and they put forward their ideas, they sort of shut down, so to speak, right? And they're not able to express themselves or have their views heard, right? By the people who are in higher positions in these institutions, right?
Okay.
And they get frustrated, you know, and they leave. And so those things create sort of like brain drain. Because people, you know, they get frustrated, the ideas are not heard, so they tend to want to leave, you know, and go somewhere else with their qualifications, skills, and what have you. So you find all those things occurring. This is my observation, so to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, some are comments I suppose the commissioners can take on board, and then others, maybe there might be a question in there somewhere. I think we can start with easier questions. The one about abortion, I think we can leave that the last, and somebody who's brave enough can deal with that one. But clearly the question about the Polytechnic and skills training and access to those types of institutions is something that has been recurring, because you have those who have the certification, they get into the university, they get into the community college, but yet the people who have no real qualifications or don't have the 4 and 5 that are being required, then have to compete with those, and then they can't get in. As I had mentioned earlier, I think TVET was making provision for persons who got on the job training, apprenticeship, and learn the skills on the job to be certified. And I suppose they get level, I can't remember the ranking that they use, but certainly to become a master craftsman in whatever craft you're doing, it's something that that should definitely be looked at. Even, as I said, in my former life as in the Ministry of Civil Service, even the whole question of certification for people like firemen, policemen, and people like that. You know, there are police forces all over the world, there are fire services all over the world, and I think if these people create job-related qualifications rather than the English and the maths. I know some of them at certain levels they do ask you for supervisory management and management, but I think qualification and movement through those types of institutions should be more based on the job skills and skills that you acquire. But the question that he raised, the whole question about access to the polytechnic and the skills training and those, that is a question that has been around for the longest while, and I'm sure that things are being done about it, but maybe not as fast as some people would like to see that. Commissioners, any other comments or any other things that were raised?
I guess, you only want to say something?
Not in connection with that, something else.
Okay, I guess what we can say that we hear that concern, and we will reflect it in our review of our draft policy, but I hear you saying that what we need here is expanded and fair access to training opportunities for people who want them, and that having trained that they also have a fair chance of getting a job in the workplace in the area in which they've trained. So I think we take that concern on board, and we will reflect it in as we review our draft. In relation to the question on abortion, the Commission is really very, very clear that we have a framework, we've adopted a framework that supports reproductive decision-making consistent with human rights, and in particular, women's unfettered right to reproductive self-determination to decide the number and spacing of their children, and that's the basis of our recommendations. So when we address fertility at all in the draft policy, it is to say for those people who want children, women or men, and have barriers to doing so, we make recommendations on how some of those barriers could be addressed, whether the barriers are fertility barriers, because we did care quite a lot about the cost of fertility treatments being outside of what is affordable for many women and men. So we address that. We also address the other impediments to having children for those who want. But very clearly, we want to reiterate that we,
Right ahead.
Okay, good evening, everyone, Mr. Ford and chair members. When I saw this, I said I'll come. Of course, I'm a Northern MP. Bit disappointed to see so few people, but obviously you have some more online. But perhaps it starts too early, 5 o'clock. As Ms. Whitaker said, the traffic and all that, people coming from distance, you know, to get here. But be that as it may. Very interesting topic, and as Chair said, and of course, Chair and I have known each other for about 50 years. I think the week before, I was then no longer Home Affairs Minister. We met at Lloyd Erskine, Sandyford on this topic. I'm not so sure how much your draft policy has changed since then. That would have been in what, July 2020, or if it's essentially the same document. But I know then it was a document that I commended and supported. You will see from a lot of the comments online, and both comments online and the couple contributions made here, that this topic is tied in with a lot of other areas. Yes. And so it's all embracive, really and truly. But in terms of population, I know that we as a government were saying that our population, roughly 280,000, as Roberta said, we are waiting anxiously the results of the census that would have carried out last year. Hopefully it should come out within the next few months. I asked Minister Strawn about it within the context of trying to get a number of, with greater certainty, a number of people with disabilities they have in Barbados, but doesn't seem to be able to produce that quite yet. But I know we were looking at increasing the population to about 360,000, maybe an additional 80,000 in the next few years. The context here is that Barbados, of course, within the standard of living that our citizens have become accustomed to in terms of social services, the free quote-unquote education at point of delivery, generally free health care. Could go up to the polyclinic at the, up the hill here, as many of my constituents do, and get free health care. And we know in the United States, in many cases, unless you have health insurance, you put down about $25,000 before the hospital looks at you. I mean, everybody wants the road done, don't we all know? I certainly know. And that costs money, lights, house repairs. People, even people who working want government to repair the house. All of this takes money, taxes, and the reality is that we have too few people in Barbados paying tax, direct tax, income tax. We have the indirect taxes, of course, but we also need more people working and paying direct taxes, income taxes, and obviously national insurance. And therefore, within the context of our country, it is, I think, estimated by the actuaries that on our predatory path that in 2050, another 25 odd years or so, that 1 out of every 2 persons in Barbados will be over 60 and therefore nearing retirement age if they aren't retired yet, and therefore less people, even less people paying income tax to support people, a growing number of people who will be at the age eligible for national insurance, and therefore we have to do something radical. We've come a far way from where we were, I must say, 12, 15 years ago, when in this same room at a town hall meeting, the then immigration department was in here on a policy of immigration which was completely backward, quite honestly, completely backward. That was saying, for instance, that a Guyanese or Trinidadian citizen who happened to have a child here, that the child wouldn't automatically take Barbados citizenship. And I got up, I vehemently opposed that, because I said that any child born here, any child, no matter how it happened to be born or to whom it happened to be born, must have Barbadian citizenship. But that was the backward, myopic thinking of the then government, as we know. And I think one of the reasons why we went through more economic reversals between 2008, 2018, than other countries at our level of development was because of those kind of policies, which, for instance, repatriated Guyanese and other CARICOM citizens, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, immigration went for you, sent you back home if you overstayed, saying that you committed a crime. And when I became minister, I said that has to stop, has to stop. All that happened is that the slave ship let off some of us in Barbados, some in Jamaica, some in Guyana. All of us are one. And give people an opportunity to regularize their status, but this deportation must stop. And clearly, in my opinion, in like 2006, 2007, when our unemployment rate was down below 7%, I think 6.7, and I had a lot of Guyanese here, for instance, and other CARICOM citizens who weren't here within the regular path or who might not have been regularized. That was when our unemployment rate was at its lowest. So that defeated the purpose that the influx of CARICOM citizens coming here, increasing our population, was being detrimental to Barbadians. Because the more people we would have here, within the context of what we can hold our resources, the better our economy will be, the greater amount of money will be in circulation. Because the Guyanese, when they repatriated the Guyanese, for instance, and I, of course, as I always do, please some interest, because my mum is Guyanese, but when they repatriated Guyanese in en masse, businesses in Bridgetown said they had to close down because no money was being spent on Friday nights in Fairchild Street and in other places. Roberta, you too, you're a Caribbean person. Your background from all about the Caribbean. And so therefore, I am all for managed population policy. The thing is, you have to sell it to Barbadians. And like I said, I really would hope that more Barbadians become involved. As I said, I'm disappointed with the numbers here tonight, because you know that there's still going to be Barbadians, of course, who are going to say, well, look, if you can't provide house for us, for me here, how are you going to provide for all these people coming in? Or if water's scarce and in some parts of Barbados, brown, how are you going to provide that? And other issues as well, social services. But I contend the more people we have within a managed system, the more resources financially we can have, the more people paying taxes, NIS, because they have to be regularized, and we will be better off in the long run. The issue of, which has come up in terms of people, and obviously we all know, as Ms. Whitaker said, women are still and will always be the main care providers for children. The issue of the tax incentives, which we used to have under the ONAFA regime, I think 2 children, tax breaks. We don't have that anymore. All that came off in the last administration, hasn't been put back on yet. It's something that would have to be considered when we can financially manage it to help this issue. I suppose that our family planning policy, which we started in the 70s, has worked too well, better than we imagined, because I think 1.9 children now per adult that we get in Barbados. And of course, the issue there is a lot of professional or career women are only getting 1 child, or a lot no children, and some at the most 2. Whereas, and Prime Minister spoke about it last week, there are women, families that perhaps cannot manage as many children financially, emotionally, mentally, and in terms of support systems as they get. So it is a question here, because a child that is conceived tonight is not going to be resourceful in terms of the state and the economy until at least 20 years from now. So we have to import people with skills who will be able to assist us in terms of development of this economy. The question is now where those people are going to come from practically. So we have, Mr. Rudder, of course, the CARICOM skills national legislation, because some of what you spoke of we have already, and that allows you as well as CARICOM Skill National to come with your family. Of course, you're going to be able to come with your wife and children. And those persons are entitled to the benefits of Barbados health and education, just as any Barbadian. When I was Minister of Home Affairs, that was changed, because before that, you used to have to pay $350 a term for your child to go to school. That came off. It's just like if you same privileges as a Barbadian, we probably need to expand, obviously, the categories of persons who can move freely. Ms. Bayer, of course, is an expert on that. That has been widened. I think it's 12 now. But we're behind the OECS countries. In the OECS, there are 7 or 8 countries, 8 I think it is, they have full freedom of movement. Move from St. Vincent, St. Lucia, work, no work permit. Tomorrow, next year, go to Dominica. And so their system, their integration system is further than ours at CARICOM level. But where are these 80,000 people going to come from? That's a question that you all are going to have to answer, and certainly address your minds to the people, because you know how it is with Bajans. When the policy about to come in is when people are going to come and say, demand this, that, when you're all giving them the opportunity now and the parts not taking the advantage. Because let's face it, the Guyanese, I think they carried out a poll a couple years ago or so in Guyana, how many Guyanese that got deported from Barbados under the last government won't come back, and the very few won't come back, because Guyana growing now at near 50% every year. So other CARICOM citizens, yeah, perhaps. We used to move a lot, Barbadians. We move all around the world. So, but are we going to therefore look to attract more CARICOM citizens? Yes, the issue of widening Barbados citizenship, again, when I was Home Affairs Minister, the proposal was put on the table that, and I think somebody asked the question, Mr. Rudder or Mr. Ford, citizenship by descent, bringing that down to great-grandchildren. I don't know where it will end up. I think the Home Affairs Minister in Parliament spoke about it, that he wants to bring, and as he has said before, an Immigration Act finally to Parliament, the new Immigration Act, which has been talked about for a long time, and a point system, whereby you won't have to wait as now 5 or 7 years, and under the law and constitution, but effectively the Immigration Department, certainly before my time, had you waiting 20 years before you got citizenship, and had the policy that you couldn't get citizenship right away, that don't mind you're here more than the 10 years under the Constitution, 7 years in fact for Commonwealth citizens, you couldn't get citizenship right away. You had to come through, get immigrant status first, then permanent residence, then citizenship. So Immigration Department, quite honestly, was one government department that was collecting a lot of money, in my opinion, unconstitutionally. But as the Minister of Home Affairs said, we're looking to, that's no longer in effect anyway. People getting citizenship and quickly now, but we're looking for a point system, just like what Canada has, for instance, merit system. And once you can achieve by your skills and other criteria, those point system, you get citizenship automatically. So clearly, looking to attract Barbadian descendants that way in the developed world and in other parts, who to come back here. I know, as you all know, we had a wee gathering, started it in 2020, and this time, exactly this time, 3 years ago is when COVID came and stopped that. I mean, we were looking then to obviously war Barbadian descendants to come and sign up for citizenship, and policy, of course, the immigration after COVID, new immigration policy, and I suppose population policy took a back step in terms of trying to keep as many people alive and healthy. So we have to, I think, get a strategic framework as to where we're going to get these 80,000 odd people from to grow our economy. And as I said, it's going to have to be tied in with other things, provision of social services, which you're going to have to answer the population of Barbados. How are we going to be able to improve that to accommodate all of these new citizens and residents of Barbados. But we've seen how the Welcome Work program has operated, the success of it, people living here, paying taxes, employing people, because that is it. Once you get skilled, resourceful people in Barbados, they're going to be, they got to pay rent or buy a house, they got to drive transportation, somehow hired cars or buy cars, that is more tax. They have to buy food, employing people within their household, for instance. So this is the context that we have to look, and that we have now outgrown the system that we have operated on, and we need to expand. But as you see, many other issues are going to have to become involved, our educational reform, because we have to open up new categories of industry. And the Prime Minister spoke about some in her budget last week. She spoke about others last year that she didn't even mention, no need to repeat this year, because last year she spoke about the expansion of our rum industry, for instance, within the context of rum being one of our achievements of excellence, and comparing what cognac does in France in 6 square miles and the billions of dollars that cognac achieves in that 6 square miles compared to our potential. But digitalization and the greed economy, and we have to open up new areas. One of the problems, again, is going to be that, yes, as I think was inferred earlier, that a lot of our young people who go to university overseas haven't come back, probably not coming back, including my son, Daily True, who been out to the island now 9 years. When he left at age 18, I told him, boy, son, I don't think you're coming back here. And he said, Daddy, why you saying that? I said, well, I just feel so. And so far, he's been proven right. He graduated now with master's next couple of months in America. And you know, because there's much higher income and opportunity out there for them. So we have to create now these opportunities for these children to come back, these young adults, to come back. And that's expansion of our industrial sector. So all of this is tied in with other factors, what you all are doing. And I believe that you realize that. I'm not so sure when you're looking as a commission to bring this into effect. Obviously, I know it'll have to be a cabinet decision, but it has to be, I suppose, an issue of gradualism. Our migration statistics are not as high, of course, as Jamaica's or Guyana's, but still it is pretty high, whereby we need to attract the skills of Barbadians back to Barbados. And, you know, I suppose it doesn't, we always have to accommodate people who might be willing to work 6 months here, 6 months in the country where they were before. I see a question that was asked is, how do you set up businesses in Barbados? We've eased the ability to form companies in Barbados. And of course, under the same CARICOM Skills National Act, an enterprise I commend and support what you're doing. We need this, a greater population If not, we're going to face crisis. Nobody wants to pay increased taxes. I think if the majority of people could get away with not paying tax, they won't. So we need a situation where people need to pay the taxes and stop looking to cheat government. That is the truth, because right now government is owed $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion in arrears of tax. We feel that we could collect about half of that, 650,000. But all of that is part of the pot, that unless people pay their just taxes and dues, we can't expand. But, this is a way, alternatively, or coexistently, to raise our standard of living, and it has to happen, because if not, as I said, in 2050, we're going to find ourselves in severe problems, even before that, in terms of NIS, how we look after our elderly, how we look after our people with disabilities, how we look after our most vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hinkson, and certainly your comments were very much welcome, and I'm sure the commissioners and those involved with the policy will take them to heart. You confirm that population policy is a very comprehensive document touching a number of areas, and there are a number of other policies and programs that would need to be related to such a policy. Well, we have come to the end virtually of tonight's town hall meeting, but just to remind you that we have two more coming up this week, one on Wednesday at the St. Michael's School, again from 5 to 7, and then one on Wednesday at the Princess Margaret School, and then the one on Thursday at the St. Michael's School. So we are inviting you to be, especially those online, you can tell your friends again, those who didn't get a chance to make their comments or pose their questions tonight, can do so either on Wednesday night or Thursday night. Because as you can glean from our discussions tonight, that this is a policy that would affect all of us, and we don't want what happens on a number of occasions where when the opportunity is there, you don't say anything, but then when the policy is about to be implemented or when it's coming to Parliament, then everybody has questions and concerns. So thank you very much to the commissioners who have made it out in person this evening, and those who are online. Again, thanks to all those who had a part in facilitating today's meeting, and also those who had a part in bringing this policy to where it is at the present moment. And I'll ask Ms. Clark, Roberta Clark, who is the chair of this committee, to give the final say.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ford. I just want to, maybe I start off by thanking you very much for your moderation of the session. And I also want to thank Mr. Hinkson. I think you said it so eloquently. A lot of the concerns that are reflected in the policy and also the ways in which we have to address the policy recommendations. You talk about gradualism, and I think we hear that very clearly, and that has been, we've used the word incrementalism in the policy, that we have to be incremental, but also to reiterate something that Dr. Arlene spoke about, which is that we need to be continuously providing ourselves information to inform our policy. So data is so important. Collection of data, monitoring what we're doing, the implementation of the policy will be very important as well. I want to say through these consultations, we hope to, we've taken note of the questions that you've asked and some of the recommendations, or all of the recommendations that you've given, and we will be continuing the consultation process at the end of this week, after which the Commission will meet, and then we will do a revision of the draft policy. It is a draft policy, which we will then submit once again to Cabinet, and Cabinet will consider it, and we leave it in their hands. But the consultation process is really very important. So for those of you who may have had questions, or you think that we need to be more clear about some of our recommendations, or we need more expansive recommendations, please write. There is a on the GIS website, you will see where you can send in your recommendations, and you can also access the policy on the Barbados GIS website if you have not had a chance to look at it. So with that, I want to thank the commissioners, Mr. Rudder, Dr. Aline, Ms. Bayer, and Ms. Winnell here, who is also the co-chair of the deputy chair of the commission. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Pray you get home safe.